Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and I'm so excited to bring you our latest Patreon project, the Carousel dress. This dress was inspired by a true vintage dress that I saw someone wearing at Dapper Day at Disneyland, and it was just so gorgeous in pink stripes with a flounce and piping and bows, and I knew that I would have to create something similar for you here on Patreon. I'm really excited about it because it's very classic charm to me. The 50s silhouette, the structured bodice, the feminine details, but then also the techniques are very classic charm to me too. Today we're going to be sewing a structured bodice with princess seams and fisheye darts. We're going to be doing an all-in-one facing with a clean finish. We'll be doing our signature lapped zipper. And then I'm also going to show you how to sew this really fun and flirty flounce with an optional tulle underlayer. So you have a few options with this pattern, as always. You can do the flounce, or you can choose to do a more simple, elegant A-line skirt shape. And if you would like to see the effect of that, make sure to check out the line art. Okay, you can also do some really fun techniques with this, including piping and, like I said, that tulle underlayer on the flounce. So make sure to check out the instructions for detailed illustrations on piping. Now let's walk through some of the features of the dress. It has a beautiful scoop neckline, sleeveless, has princess seams as well as fisheye darts on the side panels for a lot of shaping. Then we have princess seams that go down to this beautiful flounce, which is gathered. And you can see we have put piping into the flounce seam and then added little bias tubing bows at the side seams and the princess seams. And then you can also see the double layer of tulle under the flounce, which helps give it that really structured shape. So today I'm going to be sewing the version with the flounce. I'm going to show you how to do the tulle underlayer. So I can't wait to get started. Let's go ahead and get sewing. Okay, let's talk through the pattern pieces. So as always, we have minimized the pattern pieces a bit so that you can see them all on one tabletop, which I find really helpful for just getting a sense of how the pattern goes together. So here are the four main dress pieces, 1 through 4, and I've laid them out so they go from center front to center back. So center front is cut on the fold. You can see the neckline here. This is the side front panel, piece number 2. And one thing that's a little unusual about this dress that we like to incorporate into some of our more fitted styles is that it has a fisheye dart, which is a shaping dart on the side panel. And then we have piece number 4, which is the dress side back. Now, this piece looks a little funny, but we did a lot of work to get it to fit really well. Sometimes panel dresses like this will have some extra length in the center back panels. So we've done a lot of work on our end to make sure that these back panels fit you really well. So don't be alarmed if these look a little unusual to you, but this is the side back panel. And this gets sewn to piece number 3, which is the center back panel. Now, you will notice that each of these pieces has a horizontal cutting line near the thigh, and that is for the flounce variation. So if you're going to be making the flounce, you're going to cut right on that line. It already has the seam allowance included. If you want to make the A-line version, you would cut all the way to the bottom of the piece. Okay, 4 more pieces to look at. We have 5 and 6, which are the optional flounce. You can see they are both cut on the fold. This is the front flounce and this is the back flounce. For both of these, you would cut your fabric, and if you want a little extra volume, which I know we all do, in your flounce, then you could cut 2 layers of tulle as well to give it that extra bit of volume. And then finally, you have your all-in-one facing pieces. So piece number 7 is the front facing, piece 8 is the back facing. 7 is cut on the fold, and for 8 you would cut 2. For both of these, you will also need to cut your interfacing. Okay, so those are all of your pattern pieces. Okay, let's talk recommended fabrics and supplies. You have a lot of fabric options with this dress, and as always, we have listed all of our recommendations in the instructions. But just to give you a general idea, we do recommend light to medium weight fabrics for this dress, woven fabrics. And if you watched our Fit Clinic last month, you'll get a lot of ideas for the type of fabric you want for this dress. But you're looking for something structured, a woven, and preferably with no stretch or very little stretch. Okay, so let's talk about a few different options. On the casual end of the spectrum, I think this dress works beautifully in quilting cotton or broadcloth. So we found these really fun stripes for our carousel versions of the dress. So this is a perfectly fine solution for this dress, and it looks great, especially with the flounce, to have a structured cotton. We also used this really fabulous linen for the one that I'm wearing now, and linen has a great structure for this dress as well. Plaids look beautiful in this dress, so you could do a linen plaid or a cotton plaid. And then for more dressy options, you could go with something with a little bit of structure like a silk matka. This navy matka is beautiful. Silk dupioni would look gorgeous for a cocktail version. And I personally am dying to make this dress in a file fabric. And this is a cotton acetate blend file. So you could do something like this with that sort of slight rib to the texture. And another textured fabric that I love is this hammered silk and wool blend. So any of these would make a beautiful carousel dress. There are a lot of options out there. You will also potentially want some tulle. If you really want to get that volume in the flounce, you're looking for a structured tulle. You don't want anything that's too soft, like those very soft nylon tools. So we used Italian tutu tulle, which we will link you to, but I know that Joann's also sells some more structured tulles as well. So there are a lot of options out there for tulle. Interfacing wise, you're going to be looking for something lightweight. We used a tricot interfacing, a knit interfacing, or weft would be another good solution, a lightweight woven, but you're looking for a fusible interfacing for your all-in-one facing. You're also going to want to stabilize your zipper opening, so you can use one of these rolls of 1¼ inch wide stabilizer for that, or you could just cut strips from your fusible interfacing. Okay, a few other things. Thread, as always, you're going to be using all-purpose polyester thread. And then you will want a fresh needle on your machine. I like Microtex for woven fabrics, so that's what I'm going to be using today. And then piping is optional, but it looks great on this dress. So if you want, you can use some ready-made piping. I think this is a Wright's maxi piping. Looks great on the flounce seam. You can also make your own piping using cording and some bias tape. Another thing that you can do is use that same fabric that you make your piping out of to make little bows, make some little tubing to make bows, and it looks great on this dress. If you're using tulle in your flounce, I would really recommend having some double fold bias tape on hand as well to bind the seam allowances there, because the tulle can get really scratchy, especially those cut edges against your legs. So you want to just enclose that seam allowance just so it's more comfortable to wear. And then finally, the last thing you're going to need is a regular, not invisible zipper, and it should be 24 inches long. So you're going to want to find a color that matches your dress, because we're doing a lapped zipper application today. And that's it for your supplies and fabrics. Okay, we are ready to start sewing. So the first steps we're going to do are constructing the body of the dress. So first things first, I've already stay stitched my neckline, so you can see on my dress front here. I'm using this bold floral print from one of my collections a few years ago now. So to stay stitch your neckline, you're going to want to start at your shoulder, go to the center, backstitch, turn it over, start at the other shoulder, and then overlap your stitching at center front. And that's just so that you don't go all the way around and distort the neckline. The stay stitching is there to stabilize the neckline, so you don't want to distort the neckline in the process of stay stitching. Okay, so we've done that. The next thing you'll want to do is some stay stitching from the underarm curve right here down to the waistline notch, okay? There are 3 notches on this princess seam on the front. So you're gonna go stay stitch at 1/2 inch all the way down to the lower notch there. And that's gonna help us sew the princess seams, which you will see in the next step. Okay, before we sew the princess seams, we need to sew our fisheye darts. So on the side front panel of the dress, you are going to make sure that your fisheye darts are marked really well. And we are going to pin at both ends of the dart. And just like with the stay stitching, you kind of have to like start in the middle and then go to the outside. You don't want to sew from one end to the other because you could potentially get puckers at the end of your dart where you started. So I'm going to start from the middle of the dart. I'm just pinning through the lines to make sure that they are matched up here. So I'm going to sew this side first from the center to the point, and then I'll show you the next part. So just using your regular stitch length. And I back stitched in the center of the dart there, and I'm just stitching along this marked line, and then gradually off the fabric at the point. Leave yourself a couple inches to tie off your dart. So I'm going to tie this off by hand. So you'll see I didn't backstitch, just like with any other dart. I didn't backstitch at the end, at the point, and I'm tying it off instead. Okay, now we can sew the other side of the dart. So I'm going to have to start at the middle again. And you notice I just turned the piece over. I'm going to start at the middle again and go out to the other point. And I'm going to overlap my stitching in the center where my last line of stitching is. And again, I'm just going to tie off these ends. Okay, and one step that we recommend that you do is to, oops, I got a lot of loose threads here, to do a couple clips in the center of this dart to kind of release it and allow it to lay flat. But I know that some of you are a little squeamish about cutting into your fabric in an unlined garment. So I will say, especially if your fabric is more loosely woven and you're worried about it fraying, it'll probably be more malleable when you press it in this next step. So you can probably skip the clipping in that instance. Okay, we are going to put this dart over a ham and press the dart towards center front. So that's to the more curvy side of the side panel with the bust curve here. And make sure that you press each end nice and flat, the point, so that you don't have a pucker there. There we go. Okay, so now our fisheye dart is sewn, and if it doesn't look as nicely pressed from the right side as you would like, you can always give it another press and give it a little steam here. You can always put a press cloth on top too to avoid, getting shiny marks on your fabric if you're using wool or something like that. Okay, so next step is to sew the princess seam. So we're going to take our dress front, and this is where you did the stay stitching on that princess seam. And now we're going to do clips at about every 1/2 inch. And you can clip right up to your stay stitching, but not through it, obviously. And this is going to help us sew these two very different shapes together. So if you look at a princess seam, and especially this princess seam, one side curves outward and it's very curvy, and the other side curves inward. So it's always a little tricky to sew two opposing shapes together, but these clips are going to help you do that. And princess seams are kind of unique because there's extra ease built into the side panel. So sometimes I'll see more beginner sewers being confused by princess seams because the seams aren't matching up and they'll have extra length at the bottom. So what you need to do is distribute this ease of the curve into this piece. So if you do that correctly, then both sides will match up. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put these right sides together. And I like to work with the side with the clips on top. And I'm going to match it at the underarm. And then I still can see my tiny clip here, which is a notch to match. So I'm just finding those match points. This is really important, so that I know I'm distributing the pieces together correctly. And now I'm just going to spread out my clips so that they match the dramatic curve of the side panel. And there we go. So now I'm going to continue pinning all the way down, and then we're going to sew this princess seam. Okay, so sewing at 5/8 of an inch, my usual stitch length, 2.5. And there you go. You can see how those clips are spreading to meet the shape of the curve. So I'm just going to stitch all the way down. Okay, so you can see how nicely that princess seam has gone together, no excess at the top or bottom, and we're going to get a nice shape here in the bust. So for finishing, now in an unlined garment, which this is, I like to serge my princess seams together as one. I don't have my serger set up here, so I'm going to do this off camera. But what you're going to do, if you have a serger, is serge both of these seams together, trimming both seam allowances down to 3/8 of an inch. So then they'll be serged as one, and then you can press the princess seam up towards center front. Okay. If you don't have a serger, there are other methods you can use for finishing these seams as one. You could pink them together, you could use a zigzag, etc. So there are other things you can do, but I'm going to use a serger today. I'm going to repeat those steps on the other side of the dress, that fisheye dart on the other side front panel, do this princess seam on the front, and next we're going to talk about the dress back. So because we're doing an all-in-one facing, you do not want to sew the center back seam yet, okay? It's an all-in-one facing with a sleeveless dress, which means we need to leave the center back seam open and the side seams open as long as possible until we put the facing on. Okay, so we're just going to repeat some steps sewing the princess seam on the back. So you can see that I stay stitched already on this back princess seam. And I'm going to do the same thing here where I do some clips down to the lower notch. Okay, there we go. So clipping, and then I'm going to sew the back princess seam together like this. Okay, one thing I do want to note is that I have already stabilized my center back zipper opening down to the zipper mark, okay, with that 1¼ inch wide strip of stabilizer. So I'm pinning this just like I did on the front, matching those clips to the curve. It's not as dramatic a curve because it doesn't have the bust room like the front, but it still has a slight curve just because of the shape of the princess seam itself. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to sew it at 5/8 inch, and then I'm going to serge just like I did for the front. Okay, so I want you to get through all of these steps, sewing your front and back princess seams, finishing them, and then you're going to sew the dress front to the back at the shoulder seams and press those seams open, okay? I really want to spend more time later on the all-in-one facing and the zipper. So I'm going to let us get through these steps, and then we will meet back here and talk about preparing the facing. Okay, so here's the point that I am at now. I have sewn my front princess seams, my back princess seams. I sewed my shoulder seams, so front to back dress, press those open. And important thing when doing an all-in-one facing on a sleeveless dress, you do not want to sew your side seams or your center back seams. So the only part of the dress that should be constructed other than the princess seams is the shoulder seam. Everything else is open. Next, you're going to take your front facing and your back facings and sew those together at the shoulder seams and press those open. And again, leave center back open and the side seams open. And so the next thing we're going to do is put them together around the neckline. So I was just realizing that I haven't really taught an all-in-one facing on Patreon, I don't think. And this is really exciting because I used to teach these 2-day workshops all around the world, and we would focus on the night and day dress and do the sleeveless version with an all-in-one facing, a clean finish at the neckline, and a lap zipper. So I feel like this is really a 2-day workshop in a little Patreon video. So I hope you guys enjoy this. First thing we're going to do is you're going to take your dress and you are going to put it right side up on a flat surface, and you're going to get it nice and flat. So I'm just going to have my dress kind of hanging off the ironing board here, but I'm just isolating the neckline here. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my facing piece, put it right sides together. And I'm going to pin at the shoulder seam lines, just focusing on the neckline, so don't worry about the armholes yet. Okay, and I know you've seen me do this before in a Patreon video, the clean finish. I can't remember what project we did it for most recently, but this is a charm staple, this technique. We're going to be creating a clean finish at the back neckline by doing some different folding techniques at center back. So right now I'm looking at the dress back. This is the right side, left side, and then the facing right side together with it. So the right side of the dress, as we're looking at now, this is going to be the zipper underlap side, right? We're doing a lapped zipper, and this will be the underlap side, this will be the overlap side. So we're going to take both of these seam allowances on the right side, and we're going to fold them as one. So you see I have them right sides together here, and I'm going to fold them as one, turning them up towards me, folding them together 1/2 inch. There's a lot of numbers to remember here, but remember all of this is in your written instructions as well. So I just put one pin there to hold them together. And then on the left side, you're going to take the facing alone, okay? So on this side, we're not going to turn them together. We're going to turn the facing alone 7/8 inch. And I'm just going to kind of finger press it like that. And you can put one pin there. And then the dress seam allowance, you're going to turn up and around the facing seam allowance 5/8 inch. Okay, so 7/8 of an inch on the facing, 5/8 of an inch on the dress. And they're wrapped around each other, just like on the right side of the dress. And I'm gonna pin these in place. And the reason for this is after we stitch around the neckline, when you turn this right side out, it's gonna create a nice finished edge there. Then you're gonna turn the facing and then it's gonna clear the zipper in a really beautiful way. Do you have to do this? No, but if you don't, you'll have to be like folding the facing out of the way. So if you're just looking for little techniques to elevate your sewing, I really think this is one of them. Okay, so now that we've pinned the center back neckline on both sides, I'm just going to continue to pin around the front neckline. And then we're going to stitch. Okay, so let's take this over to the machine. And I'm going to be stitching at 5/8 of an inch all the way around the neckline. I need to start at this back folded edge on the right side of the dress back, okay? So I want to make sure I stitch right on the edge here and then back stitch. And now I'm going to just stitch all the way around the neckline, finishing at the opposite side of the fold. So I've stitched all the way around the neckline, and the next thing we're going to do is first trim away the corners at the center backs, just to get rid of that bulk. And now I'm going to grade the seam allowances. So I'm going to trim down the facing seam allowance on its own down to about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so this will be the shorter seam allowance. And then the dress will be slightly taller, so about 1/4 inch on the dress, okay? So I'm gonna continue like this all the way around the neckline, grading the seam allowances. And once you're done with grading, now we're going to need to do some little clips into the curves around the neckline. So just start at the curviest parts and do a clip about every 1/2 inch. Anywhere that's more straight, like this area on the shoulder strap, you don't have to worry about so much, but really around like the deep scoop in the front and then the curved sections in the back, you definitely want to do some little clips to get these curves to lay flat when you turn it right side out. Now, one more thing before we turn it right side out to understitch is that you'll need to do a little clip next to the first folded in seam allowance. On both sides. So the left side, I'll do a little clip on the seam allowances next to that interfaced folded in seam allowance. And then also on the other side, if I can find it, here we go, next to the folded in seam allowance. And this will allow us to understitch. You'll see what I mean when you get there, because you won't be able to turn it right side out without it twisting unless you do that little clip. Okay, next thing to do is to understitch the facing around the neckline only. Now, you may notice that my order is a little different than other sewing patterns. Most sewing patterns will have you do the neckline, do the armholes, and then try to understitch all of them in one step. I prefer to just do the entire neckline and then move on to the armholes next because it's a little less clunky because you won't have to do it in so many different stages like we will on the armholes in the next step, which you will see. Okay, so now we are going to open out the facing from the dress and we're going to understitch the facing. And here's where you'll be happy you have that little clip because you're going to have to orient the seam allowances towards the facing here. And we're going to just hold these two layers nice and taut. And I'm stitching right next to the seam line, about like a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch, making sure that I am stitching those I'm catching the seam allowances in my stitching. Okay, so I'm going to continue understitching all the way around the neckline only. All right, so that was the understitching. And the next thing I'm going to do is press the neckline from the right side of the dress. So just turn the facing into the right side and just use your fingers to roll out the facing like that. And then I'm going to press all the way around to get a nice crisp edge on your neckline, okay? So continue that all the way around the neckline, and then that is it for the neckline part of the facing, and then we'll come back and do the next steps. Okay, so we have just finished doing the neckline, and you can see how mine is pressed in. And what I want you to look at right now is the armholes. So see how it's like a C shape on each side at the armhole because the side seams are still open. And right now we have the facing wrong sides together with the dress because we turned the facing to the inside. Okay, so now we're going to kind of reverse that and we're going to turn the facing back right sides together, okay? And we're focusing on these C shapes on each side of the dress. So turn, and I'm matching the shoulder seam here and putting a pin there, and then I'm just going to pin around the entire armhole curve. Okay, and you could do the other armhole now too. I'm going to just focus on one to demonstrate. So now that I have the armhole pinned, I'm going to stitch around the C shape from one end to the other. Okay, and now grading, just like we did on the dress. The facing will be about 1/8 of an inch, and then the dress seam allowance itself is about 1/4 inch. Okay, so I'm going to do the grading all the way around this armhole. Okay, and again, just like on the neckline, because we have some really curvy areas, you're going to want to do clips about every 1/2 inch around those really curved sections of the armhole on both sides. Okay, now I'm going to repeat those steps, pinning, sewing, braiding, and clipping on the opposite armhole before we can turn the dress right side out. Okay, so now that I have braided and clipped my underarms, I'm going to turn the dress right side out through the armholes. So what you're going to want to do is I have the dress front facing me, and then I'm going to pull each back separately through the shoulders. Okay, so you're going to reach between the layers, the facing, and you just kind of have to get your little fingers in here and grab the back while you're in there, and then pull it right side out. Let's try that one more time. It's a little fiddly. Okay, so I'm just going to keep working like this to pull the dress back out through the shoulder. I'm going to have to repeat it on the other side too. And this is why we couldn't sew the side seams or the center back seam, because otherwise you would be caught in a perpetual infinity loop. And I know this because I've done it before by accident, and it's a little perplexing when you realize that you keep turning and turning and it won't turn right side out. So if that happens to you, it's because you sewed the side seams or the center back seam before doing this part, and you need to wait till after. Okay, so there's one side. Okay, so there's one side done, and then you would do the other side as well. Obviously, I won't make you watch me struggle through that one as well, but I'm going to focus on just one side at a time now. So the next thing we're going to do is understitch the underarms. But the thing about this is that you're not going, see, we still have our C shape here. You're going to be understitching like this on the facing, and you're only going to be able to get so far, right? Because you're not going to be able to get into that tiny spot in the shoulder. So then you're going to have to flip it over and do the other side separately. So if you're doing this all at once, like you've already turned out both sides of the dress right side out, you're going to have to do this understitching in 4 separate stages: front, back, okay? So, and that's why I like to do the neckline first, because if we hadn't, then we would have to be doing the neckline in 2 stages, and it just gets ridiculous, right? So we want to minimize how many stages of understitching we're doing. Okay, so I'm going to do this side of the armhole, and again, I'm just making sure I'm catching my stitching. I'm sorry, catching my seam allowances underneath in my stitching. And you're going to go as far as you can, but there's going to be a point where you can't go any further because the space is going to get too tight. Okay, and that's about as far as I can go. So I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to trim my threads. And then I'm going to go to the other side of that same underarm, same side of the underarm. And I'm going to understitch the facing on this side. And this is the front side that I'm working on now, and you're not going to be able to go very far at all. Because of the low scoop neckline, you just really can't get that far into the shoulder. So do your best, but you're going to have to stop pretty quickly. Okay. Next, we will be pressing this. So we're focusing on this C shape yet again. So find your C shape. And we're going to with the facing turned to the inside of the dress. Just press those edges. And now here you'll see this is sort of shoulder strap area where I wasn't really able to understitch that far. So where you don't have understitching, you're gonna have to work extra hard to make sure that that edge is nice and crisp. So kind of roll it out with your fingers and then press. And then continue to the front here. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next step, even though I haven't done the other side of my understitching, but you guys get the idea. So the next thing I'm going to do is sew this side seam. So I'm going to put these right sides together, those two, the front and back that I just understitched. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lift out the facing again away from the dress. Let me trim these threads here. There we go. Okay, so you're going to lift out the facing like this, and now I'm going to match the underarm seam. Put a pin there. Pin the facing, and then pin the side seam. Now, remember way back at the beginning of this video where I talked about the pattern pieces and how the side seam on the side back was a little bit funny looking because of all the fit work that we'd done to get this to really conform to the body in the back. You'll see when you first put these together, it will look slightly like they're two totally different shapes, but you'll see that you can put those raw edges together just like with any other seam, and they actually match beautifully. So keep that in mind if when you first look at them, they don't look right to you. Okay, so I'm going to sew from the lower edge, and this looks like a little mini dress because we haven't put the flounce on yet, right? So I'm going to sew from this lower edge, and then here I'm going to have to pivot slightly and finish stitching at the facing, all in one line of stitching. Okay, so here's my underarm seam. So you're just going to need to pivot slightly here because there's a bit of a corner where it goes out to the facing. But now we're just going to continue finishing our line of stitching up the facing like this. And then back stitching. Okay, so now I have a little bit of pressing work to do. I'm going to press this seam allowance open, and then you'll see how the facing is going to get turned to the inside of the dress. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little time pressing, and I'm obviously going to finish my other armhole, and then we'll come back for the next steps. Okay, so we are ready to sew our zipper now that side seams are sewn, and I have gone ahead and sewn my center back seam from the zipper circle down. Okay, so you can go ahead and do that step, and now we're just going to focus on the zipper. So the other thing I've done ahead of time is that I pressed in my seam allowances at center back. On the right side, which is the underlap side, you're going to want it to press in that seam allowance 1/2 inch. On the left side, or the overlap side, you're going to press it in 5/8 of an inch. So it's the same amount that you turned it in at the neckline when you did that folding step for the clean finish, okay? But just go ahead and do that all the way down. Now you're going to grab your zipper, and we're going to start with the underlap side, and you're going to want your zipper closed. I don't know why I just opened it. Okay, close your zipper, and you are going to place it behind the fold, and see how I have this metal stop right here? Or if I bend down the zipper tape, that is exactly where you want the zipper to meet the neckline edge right there, okay, at that bend. And then you can release that little bit of the tape at the top. And so we're placing the fold of fabric right next to the zipper teeth and then pinning through all the layers. So through both fabric layers and then through the zipper tape as well. Okay, so we're pinning all the way down. I'm gonna have a couple extra inches of zipper at the bottom, and that's totally fine. You can shorten your zipper if you want, but because it's just, you know, a couple inches, I'm just gonna leave it. So pin all the way down, and then we're gonna go to the machine and stitch this side. So you're going to want to reach into your My Little Pony cup and grab a zipper foot. And I'm going to, this kind of zipper foot, you just have to move your needle to the correct side of the zipper foot, whereas most zipper feet are the other way. You have to move the zipper foot to the correct side of the needle. But whichever way yours is, you want to make sure that you're going to be, the zipper foot is going to be here and then the zipper is to the left, right? Because we're stitching the right side of the zipper. Okay, so you're going to open the zipper about halfway is fine, doesn't really matter. And we're going to start stitching at the very top, just next to the fold of fabric. And sometimes I'll lower my needle first here, and then the presser foot, because that just kind of helps secure everything under the presser foot. All right, so I'm gonna start stitching here, back stitch. And I'm just stitching right next to the fold of fabric. I'm gonna do this all the way down. And when I get close to the zipper pull, you can just stop with your needle down and close the zipper. Okay, so I'm going to stop with my needle down here, lift the presser foot, and then close the pull just to get it out of the way. Okay, so that's one side of your zipper done. That is the underlap side. So now we're going to pin the overlap side. You're going to want to close your zipper again. And now we're going to take the folded edge of the overlap side and you're going to place it over the top of the zipper pull here. And then we're going to pin to the left of the pull. And we're going to continue like that all the way down. So you're going to take your fold, place it so that it just covers the line of stitching that we just did on the zipper underlap. And you're going to put your pin about 3/8 of an inch to the left of that fold. So if you lift up that little flap that's formed there, you should see the zipper teeth there. And I've pinned through all the layers through to the zipper tape. Now the important thing is that you'll still be able to open and close your zipper and if you can't, that means you've pinned too close to the teeth. So you can just double check that. And you're going to need to pin this all the way down to the bottom of the zipper opening. So I'm going to spend a little time pinning this, and then we will come back to stitch it. Okay, so now that I have pinned the entire overlap side. Now we can go and sew it. So just to clarify again what I was saying, you want to make sure that you're able to open the entire zipper still, okay? And in fact, we do want to start with it all the way opened. So if you're not able to open the zipper, that means you pinned a little too close to your zipper teeth, and you can go back and adjust your pinning now. Okay, but now we are good to start sewing. I'm going to switch my needle to the opposite side of the presser foot and start at the top. We're going to be sewing at 3/8 of an inch. And make sure that you don't hit the metal stop underneath. So I like to do the first couple stitches sometimes with my hand wheel just so I don't break my needle. Okay, so we're going to continue down like this, top stitching at 3/8 of an inch through both folds of fabric and through the zipper tape underneath. And it's really important to just hold everything nice and taut here so that you don't get any pulls or little pleats in your stitching. So I just like to hold it with my left hand out here and my right hand to just kind of create a smooth surface for stitching. Okay, so now you're going to go and get as close as you can to your pull without stitching on it. Stop with your needle all the way down, lift the presser foot, and then close the pull. Just get it out of the way so it's up here a little bit. You don't have to close it all the way. And now we're going to finish our stitching here. And this can be a little scary because you don't have a guide now on the right side of your presser foot because the zipper is closed. You're just going to continue your stitching, and then at the very bottom here of the base of the zipper, you're going to pivot and finish off a little L shape at the bottom of your zipper. So right here where you can see my seam opens up to the lap zipper, I'm going to stop with my needle down. I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to stitch across the base of the zipper. So I'm stitching right through those nylon zipper teeth, and it's totally fine. You just don't want to stitch through anything metal, right? So if your metal stop is there, you're going to need to adjust. Okay, so that is it, your lapped zipper. So you can just double check your work here, but you can see I have an L shape of stitching on the overlap side, and this is what it looks like closed. So this is the overlap, and then there's your underlap for the hidden lapped zipper. So there we go. So that is it for your lapped zipper. Okay, so now we are ready to work on the flounce. So I've gone ahead and done a few steps here. So like we talked about early on, there's a flounce front and a flounce back. Now, you're going to need to kind of keep track of which is which throughout the process, and if you're ever not sure, know that the flounce back is slightly wider than the flounce front. Okay, so you're going to sew the side seams, those short vertical ends, on the flounce in your outer fabric, and then you're going to repeat that process with your 2 layers of tulle. So one ring of tulle and then sew another, okay? So then you're gonna have 3 flounces with the side seam sewn. Next thing you're gonna do is put them together, and you can see this is a really big piece here, so it'd be hard to show you all of these steps. You're gonna put them together at the upper edge by pinning all the way around. So what I have here is my outer flounce, 1 layer of tulle, 2 layers of tulle. Oh, and another important thing to tell you is that you should not press or iron your tulle because it will melt. Okay, so when you sew those side seams, just finger press those seam allowances to one side. Okay, do not put an iron on it. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, oh, the other thing that will happen is that if you wear a pin cushion on your wrist like me, your pins are going to get stuck in your tool as you try to do this. So, yeah, just a hazard of this step here. Okay, so let me pick all my pins out of my tool. Next thing we're going to do is gathering stitches, which is also kind of going to base these these 3 layers together. So I'm going to use a long stitch. I'm going to go to about 4.5, and I'm going to, between the side seams, they're gathering circles on the pattern, right? So you're going to be doing 2 rows of gathering stitches on the front and then 2 in the back, and you're going to break your stitches at the side seam. So do this in 2 separate stages. Do gathering stitches on the front between the circles and then gathering stitches on the back between the circles. So just starting slightly in from that seam where your circle is, I'm going to stitch at 1/2 inch. Now you're going to want to make sure you have a nice long tail here to pull when you do your gathering stitches. Stitching at 1/2 inch. I'm going to go all the way to the next side seam and stop at the circle right before the side seam. And this whole process is kind of like sewing a gathered skirt and sewing it to a bodice, right? It's just the waist, it's a flounce seam instead of a waistline seam. Okay, now I'm coming up to the next side seam, so I'm going to stop just shy of it where my gathering circle is, and I'm going to make sure to give myself a nice long tail there, and then I'm going to go back to this whole section, there are pins everywhere, and I'm going to stitch at 1/4 inch. So just, I mean, we've done gathering stitches so many times together, right? So this is the same idea. We're going to do this next one at 1/4 inch. So there'll be 2 lines of gathering stitches next to each other to pull up when we get to that next step. But you're going to do the front, and then we're going to do these same steps on the back. So we have 2 rows of gathering stitches on the front and 2 rows on the back. So I've gathered my flounce. I did all those gathering stitches. I pulled them up. That took a little while, so give yourself some time to do that. So I have a gathered flounce, and we're going to sew it to the dress. Now, if you want to do piping on your flounce seam, which looks really great, you can do that now. So now would be the time. I'm not doing piping on this dress, so I'm going to skip that step. But if you're curious to do piping, do check out the instructions because it does tell you every step of doing piping. Okay, so I am going to take my dress and I'm going to put it right sides together with the flounce. So I'm going to turn the dress inside out, and you're going to want to match your side seams on the flounce to the dress. Okay, here's my other side seam. And now I'm just going to spend some time pinning this. Okay, so I just realized how tight everything was getting and that it would be much simpler to actually do this from the inside of the flounce. So I highly recommend that because otherwise you're trying to do the whole flounce within the body of the dress and it gets really tight. So take it from me, work with the flounce on the outside and the dress on the inside. So I'm just going to keep pinning all the way around. You may need to adjust your gathers here. It looks like I have too many gathers. So I'm just going to spend some time here adjusting my gathers, pinning all the way around, and then I'm going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so I sewed all the way around the flounce. And so I have a completed flounce here looking very adorable. And so we're just going to talk about finishing steps now because you're pretty much done, except for a few minor things. So with the flounce, especially if you use tulle, you're going to want to do some work to get it to be more comfortable to wear, like we talked about with binding this seam. So what you would do is trim this seam allowance down by about half. And then at that point, you'll be able to use your double fold bias tape, sandwich it over the seam, and then stitch next to the edge, and make sure that you're catching both edges of the bias tape in your stitching to enclose these rough edges of the tulle, okay? But you're gonna need to trim them down, like I said, by about half first. This seam gets pressed up towards the dress, but if you use tulle, again, just going to warn you not to press from the inside of the dress because you will melt it. So if you, from the outside of the dress, you can press if it looks like it needs a little bit of finishing, you know, if you want to just make that flounce look a little crisper and your pleats to look a little crisper, then you can definitely press from the right side of the dress, but do not press on the tulle. Okay, so that is it for the tulle for the flounce seam. Other finishing little chores we have to do, the bodice, we are going to want to do finishing work with these seam allowances inside the facing and all of that. So the underarm, it's really easy actually to just stitch in the ditch to secure the underarm facings. So what you can do is just put a pin through on the right side of the dress to secure the facing in place, and then just stitch right in the ditch down to the bottom of the facing, and that will hold the facing really close to the body, and you won't have to worry about hand stitching there. You will need to hand stitch at the back neckline. So with these facings, you're going to have to turn them in all the way. Remember, we turned this in 7/8 of an inch, all the way down, pin it to the zipper tape, and then slip stitch. Now the other side, this is 5/8, no, this is 1/2 an inch. Again, pin it to the zipper tape and slip stitch. The top of the zipper tape is going to get folded in and sandwiched between the facing and the zipper itself, okay? So you're gonna hand stitch the zipper, hand stitch the facing at the back to secure it, okay? And then the final thing is hemming. So you may wish to try this on with the shoes you're planning on wearing, making sure you're happy with the length. And then once you are, you can press this up 5/8 of an inch. And then you are going to top stitch at 1/2 an inch to hem it. After that, the final thing is if you use tulle in your flounce, you're going to want to trim it so that it is about 1/2 an inch shorter than the dress itself, okay, so that you won't see it from the outside. All right, so that's all of your finishing work. Okay, everyone, that is it, your carousel dress. I hope you have loved learning how to sew this dress today. We've gone over so many classic charm techniques, like that all-in-one facing, the lapped zipper, and then of course this really fabulous flounce with the tulle underlayer. So I hope you're super inspired to make this dress in lots of different fabrics and with different options. And stay tuned because we may have some more options coming for the carousel dress for you soon. So thank you all so much for being patrons as always, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.